Hi, everyone. I realize I'm between lunch, so I'll be very quick. And also because it's a very brand new project, so we don't have results like that. So we will just, so one of the key and interesting feature of this project is actually this was told to us by the UK government. So they got in huge funding for this program called Responsible AI. And the idea is how do you connect it with the definitions that computer scientists are making on responsible AI and how it connects with the broad public policy and the market contexts. So it has very clear two questions that they asked us. And more specifically, one is to understand the productivity, and specifically for UK, because I'll show in our very first-hand results that why it matters, specifically when we talk about UK. And the second part is, do we consider productivity as an important definition for this growing context around responsible AI? So again, it's kind of very top-down in its way, and this is a ongoing exploration that government wants, because they invested a lot in two things. One is the AI Safety Institute, and the other is Responsible AI from a funding and research policy point of view. So therefore, for the first very exploratory stuff, we had like very two broad divisions. One is first to understand how AI is placed in UK's economic sectors. And the second is to first-hand understand the spatial distribution. So here, one of the unit of analysis is number of AI firms, or anyone who is offering services in the form of AI-driven services. So in the first very basic representation of, so UK is largely driven by, you can see here, real estate as one of the sectors, leading sectors, and for example, then retail, manufacturing, finance, and so that's the broad landscape where a lot of, we could see that AI integration is taking place. Also, there are certain important sectors where it's not taking place, and then that's where the context of the spatial elements become very important here. So, for example, the context is AI is going to have a huge impact on the economy, and kind of UK needs that. That's their whole pitching point behind investing a lot in programs around AI. So around addition of 232 billion pounds is expected by 2030 with the current rate of investments. The other one, which is quite interesting, is this third point. So the third HPC is the high performance computing. So the government, as a policy instrument, they're investing a lot in high performance computing clusters. And EPSRC is our surrogate for NSF, and specifically they fund engineering and physical sciences research. So they are creating these clusters across UK's different landscape, and more specifically because they want to align this with government's leveling up policy. So that's because moving things away from London, which still remains one of the major economic driver for the entire country. So most of the applications that we have seen so far across, so we had around 3,100 and something 27 firms who explicitly say that they offer AI as some sort of service. And then we see that major potential customers in the UK are healthcare, scientific, professional, and financial sectors. So that kind of is driving the whole revolution in the country. And more specifically, healthcare. I mean, Cambridge is quite strong in its bio, healthcare, and AI cluster rather than other services. And then we could see what happens here is the main kind of challenge around what's happening outside London, and that we slightly see more deeper through more spatial routes. So for example, a lot of financial services, so London being one of the financial hub, a lot of AI services are clustered there, and that kind of makes the international connections of flow of both talent, skill sets, and kind of revenues. And similarly, a lot of work is around automotive industry, but one of the challenges, they are again, quite cut off from London in its way. So there is some kind of a deficit that we find there. And these are all up north in the UK, which is around Manchester and those kind of places. So why this barrier happens? So again, I mean, these are very basic kind of secondary desk-based results. So we see that one of the main challenges that the firms are facing, challenge in the UK, are lack of access to data to train AI models, and that remains one of the major challenge. And that kind of connects it with who the firms who are quite responsible, and they demand a lot of data sets there. The second is sector-specific information is also not available at a larger scale. And I mean, that remains one of the main challenge of how government is trying to measure the impact of these AI firms. So that's kind of, it's not very clear. How do you collect this information, and what are the categorization you could make there? And the third is very connected to the behavioral side of customers. There is a strong unwillingness to adopt these technologies. And again, I mean, these are slightly driven also by Brexit in some way, because a lot of these interconnections are from European Union, and then that has some barriers, downstream effects in the UK customers as well. And also the other part is who owns this big technology. Is it US, is it China, is it EU? So again, there is a whole lot of conflicts around that. So as I mentioned, that why training data or access to training data is a big problem is actually because a lot of these innovations or a lot of these products are driven by large companies, which are mostly US, so Microsoft, Google, IBM. And they would need local training data to design those or deliver some of these services, and that remains one of the challenge. The other one, which we think is quite interesting, is the last point, and that's the micro AI. So by micro AI, it's mostly the whole push towards universities to have spin-offs or using some sort of startup mechanisms to enable creating that kind of company. So some universities are successful in it, but it still needs a lot of kind of support in this case. So again, I mean, if we just divide it, so there are three basic, so infrastructure, product, services, and this is how mostly like still AI is basically a product offering for UK. So why a lot of this is happening? So that's where we try to look at the spatial landscape. So again, I mean, there is no modeling here. It's just a comparison so far. So first is we try to just look at the co-occurrences of what is AI and what are the different sets of services that's being offered in UK. So we find that automation, robotics, machine vision, and software remains one of the major outputs across these 3,280 AI companies. So they remain some of the most popular services in its way. But then when we look at this topic geography pairs, so that's basically where these services and what are the regions where they are being produced. So you can see the main node being London. So that's the main kind of finding, I mean, a very exploratory, that we see that everything is kind of driven by London, and that remains a challenge for the rest of the nation, because how do you distribute it? So the distributed effects remains one of the challenge. So like, for example, this is London, where they have the most income, basically, because that's the hub for many economic activity. And you can see here, these are the actual number of AI firms that's been plotted across different regions. So some of the areas of high income zones, especially in the top north, so that's Scotland and parts of Scotland. So so Edinburgh has certain firms, but still it's not as you would like it to be, to have more kind of a spread out effect of this firm across the nation. Similarly, if we look at productivity, it's again London, but then Scotland, where the productivity is actually quite high. It still remains quite low in terms of actual firms being spin-off from those areas, or actual AI firms being set in these places. And same, if we just look at productivity versus income, so the main concern comes in these circles here. So that's where a lot of leveling up policies are being in place. And without this firm, so the entire kind of portfolio of AI and the skill sets, they remain in this zone of London. And again, kind of it points towards why is this happening. So for us now, we have some of these open questions moving forward. So one is like, how do we go about setting up high productivity zones in UK? And is London bubble going to be a problem? So again, I'm not an economist. We are working with economists to figure out which approach is right in this basis. And the other part is this skill sets. So high STEM skill sets who make these products or AI services, they are clustered around London, Cambridge, and Oxford. And that also remains one of the main challenge of how do you enable mobility of those talent across the zones. So finally, we come back to the broad question around, so when UK is trying to define what is responsible AI, how do we place this productivity lens in it? And is it going to be too macro in outlook, or it's going to be a critical element to enable this industry going forward? So thank you. Yeah, but we have lunch, so so there is one question.
Hello? Yeah, there we go. Real quick, I know Brexit creates challenges to startup development, for instance, and greater investment. What about the regulatory framework? I know that there is certainly a lot of concern over data protection, but is the regulatory framework supportive or limiting as far as startups? Because you mentioned you get large investment from the large companies, but of course you're looking for that to spread, with smaller companies.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I think the GDPR complexity is very high, and specifically because GDPR has much more strong affinity to how EU is governing those data protection laws, and that's kind of replicated in UK. So that remains a challenge. And I think partly because of that, why these kind of cluster funds are being released in a way that can you come up with something new which will enable these firms. But I mean, it is my answer would be anecdotal that it's going to remain a big challenge. Whether it's GDPR or whether not, because what the asking from these firms are, that's going to be more problematic. So they want huge number of data in different forms, and then they have its complexity of how do you deliver those.
Got a couple questions for you, Ramit, and thanks for sharing this. So one, just about your data and the collection challenge to build your data set into your analyses. So you have Glass.ai as one of your sources. I was curious if you had more context on, are they surveying firms, so where you're getting the information, and then how you think about solving that challenge if measuring innovation in this way matters. So defining AI and ML and robotics, and the companies know if they're using it, are they sort of honest or accurate about their use? So just your thoughts about their measurement and your measurement. And then maybe a second question is sort of related to this overarching interesting motivation that the government wanted to sort of think about growth and responsible AI together. So just wanted to get your initial your readings on that, or how that's played out. I think in the last couple of days, sort of one way it's thought about is that these things are sort of in opposition, right? There's sort of innovation versus protection, and then we have people who have challenged that. So you can make the case that growth and lifting all boats is good. But how are you all thinking about this so far?
Yeah. So I think the first answer, so that's actually the actual work package that I'll be doing in this project, which is extracting information. So my main skill set is in natural language processing and how you extract this stuff. So one idea we are trying to work is actually scrape all the AI-related documents that this firm release across sectors, and then try to link it through a graph-based model to be able to link with however they talk about machine learning, AI, or whatever services they are delivering. Does it connect with some other elements of the economic activity? So we still are in process of actually identifying those interconnections between nodes, but definitely that's one way I'm thinking. But like most of the people in the project team are economists, so they want to extract that information and then place it in some productivity model. So that's a work in progress. And the second part is, so that's where it gets interesting. So there is a shift in government now. So when this this whole tranche of funding was released, it was Rishi Sunak's government, and they had a very specific aim to be a leader of AI safety in the world. And then now the different government has a very different idea of, so these funds are released, how do you make sure they have the value for money that's being done through these public funds. So now there is a slight change in whether, the main ask that they have is put a number, economic number to AI. And it can be through responsible definition, or it can be a very simple computer science definition of products and services that we want to see. But basically, they want to see a number to it and the projections to that. So yeah, I think now, it's not a question of opposing forces, but rather they want something very boiled down version, which is not good from a research point of view, but it becomes like their ask in a way.
One more question from Baba, and then I'm going to open the floor.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and you sort of answered one of the questions I had about the change to the labor government. Now I have a question about sort of the flip side of this, which is, I guess, irresponsible AI or AI without guardrails. Do you think that if there is not a focus on making sure that AI is trustworthy or harmful to society, that would actually decrease productivity in maybe not direct ways, but indirect ways? For instance, there's a lot of concern about if AI is used to irresponsibly to harass people, particularly young people. It might, damage their mental health, and then they would not be able to do well in schools and then become, educated workers. So these are sort of like indirect lines I see, or if, cybersecurity is a big concern, it might put businesses at risk. So I'm just wondering, what about the flip side of the coin of irresponsible AI?
No, absolutely. I think also because UK's main economic product are products and services. So one of the main concern that we see, even through the polls that government have been doing, is people thinking that those service-based roles will be taken over by AI or automation in some form. So definitely there is this kind of fear already. And we see that through levels of waves that has been going on since like 2021, when the Safety AI Institute was created. So that was government's one of the major pitching point, that to stop that, we are creating this responsible AI consortium, or whatever they said. And same now with exactly like, so UK is very strong in regulation for those kind of activities, especially like how is AI being used, whether it's in policing, whether it's in schools, or whether it's directly as an effect. And then that's also kind of a concern that's raises from GDPR rules in general, and that's why this whole development around this kind of products is a challenge there. So I mean, for us, what we understand, so those questions are within this framework of still why we need to answer this question, which is on board. So what the government want us to show is that we are more towards creating responsible AI and preventing irresponsible AI, rather than getting with the narrative that irresponsible AI is also possible. And I mean, it is possible, but that they would really like not to have that narrative or rhetoric going on. So again, I mean, it's very political in that sense. So yeah, I don't have a binary answer to it, but definitely it's a framing that they want with these kind of projects.
Thank you. So any general questions?
So I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to ask my quick question of Victor, but I just wonder, I can't see you, but I wonder if what you're talking about is mostly just window dressing, since in that same time period we had the Reagan through Obama Justice Departments that were pretty deregulatory oriented, and then this is all post-Chevron when, I don't know if what you're talking about is just them parroting Department of Justice analysis. So I don't know, like I was surprised you didn't, like you're thinking about causality and what led to these big firms. It seems like the Department of Justice had a role. So I just was curious what you thought about that. Yeah.
Well, the Department of Justice's role, I suppose, between 1997 and 2015 was forbearance. It decided not to bring cases that it could have, but that's exactly what I'm positing in the causal chain mattered at the margin. Obviously, we're not in a monocausal world, but along with the package of policies that mattered a lot, like, do you go after Google in 2005, 6, or 7 or not? And they chose not to. Or if they did go after them, and the FTC also, if they went after Google for mergers, let's say, when they put together their ad stack, had very slap on the wrist type of responses like, oh, you can merge, we'll get out of the way, here are like a couple things you have to do, but don't work too hard at it because we know you're innovating, and get back to us if you want. Like, so actually I guess what is your criticism then?
But what's the role of Chevron in this? Like, so you're talking about court legal reasons, right? Courts.
Chevron deference would matter for the FTC. So the FTC comes up with merger guidelines that are way above and beyond the pay grade of the legislative branch, in that they're technically savvy, incorporating insights from economics and whatnot. Then that's Chevron deference, right? And so, yeah, I think that matters too, because Chevron deference will allow the FTC, let's say, to privilege innovation in its merger guidelines. Nobody in the legislature ever said that. Nobody writing the Sherman Act in the late 19th century ever said that. So, yeah, I think it matters. I look at that in another chapter, but I would put that separate from this analytically, in that it just accelerated, I suppose, a course of action that was already happening for decades.
Yeah, another question for Victor. Well, thank you. It was a very interesting presentation. I apologize, I didn't read the paper, so maybe you...
No, that's okay. I don't blame you.
Maybe you covered this in some part, I don't know. But something that I think was missing, and I wanted to hear your opinion about it, is the relationship between the idea of monopoly and monopsony. So when we think about market concentration, we go toward a single producer, but often this is highly correlated with going toward a single employer, right? So the question is, is antitrust only concerned about having like a monopoly and a single producer, or is also concerned about a dynamic that has to do with labor, or instead it is something that has only to be discussed in political dynamics? Do you see that antitrust also consider monopsony in their consideration?
Absolutely. It has considered monopsony belatedly and very weakly, because if you look at the statutes, they don't mention monopsony. The statutes mention monopoly, and they mention monopolization, and they mention consumer welfare in very nebulous terms when they first were written, and they don't mention monopsony. And one conjecture, I have no idea, could also be that the analytic framework and the technical apparatus around monopsony lags monopoly. It takes a while, I think, for that stuff to trickle out into the policymaker framework, maybe because labor regulation is weak in the US or something, and there wasn't a demand for it. Whereas very early, way before the Chicago School, going back to the Standard Oil, in 1911, the judges on the court are like, what the heck is monopoly, or what is market power, or what does this mean? And they didn't really have the technical background yet to do that. But there is a really good book on monopsony and antitrust. It's escaping me who wrote it, by Oxford University Press, that I reviewed. And it's amazing, and everything I learned is in that book about antitrust and monopsony. Oh, it's by Posner's son, Eric Posner, by Judge Posner's son. Judge Posner was part of the Chicago School, but his son, Eric Posner, I really recommend, if you're interested in this and want to nerd out, get the book and read it on the flight, and you'll know just as much as me, and we could have a debate about it. Yeah.
Monopsony is also kind of playing a role in the current quasi-neo-Rentesian moment, much more than it.
I don't think technically in that Kahn and Wu, I haven't seen a graph anywhere in their work that shows there is a monopsony, right? They just say like, well, Amazon is large. Amazon seems to be a big employer. Ergo, Amazon might have monopsony power. I don't know. You've got to create a model like you did and show that that's true with substitution, elasticity, all that. I have no idea. So maybe there are some populist policymakers that love econ and get into the weeds, but when I look at what they're saying, they're going back in time. And again, I'm not judging. They're just not using the technology of economics. So that's interesting. The language of monopsony versus the actual applications that come out of economists, I don't know, maybe that eventually will happen. Where courts will say something like, oh man, the FTC and Department of Justice keep saying that they're being monopsonists, let's call expert witnesses, and then they'll bore a jury to tears and actually show, well, yes or no, right? But I don't think we're there yet.
Okay. Last question very quickly, because it's lunchtime.
Sure, yeah, super quick question for Ethan. So I'm thinking about future periods of the game. Is there a need to collect training data in the future to continue to improve the models? And if so, is that potentially a reason to keep the human producers around and continue to subsidize that production? And then relatedly, can the AI models just produce their own training data, synthetic data, perhaps at a cut to quality?
So I guess I'll take this. Yeah, I think those are good questions. So whether there's a need to keep the producer, like it depends a lot on how you conceptualize what a new good is. I think there's a very narrow definition of like what these different markets are. Like we talk about them in big terms, but like in which we're really talking about like there's little innovations in the novel, and that's really actually like a new good, right? And in that world, I think more data is better, more training data is better for the quality of the good. But once the quality is high enough to force the price competition, it doesn't matter so much if you think about these narrow definitions, if you think about mantra. But you do want to keep, right, so you want humans innovating and the AIs are learning on that. So if you think about the dynamic model with lots of things, you always want humans producing. And if you're really shutting down innovation, that's bad. And that's why I do think you could imagine a model where the AI owner is subsidizing production and innovation. In order to keep driving new markets where there's rents to be made, in a world in which there's an AI owner that's charging fees or something like that.
All right, thank you. So join me in thanking again Victor, Ethan, and Ramit.